Hi everyone, welcome. I hope everyone's having a great Tuesday. I'm excited to start off our programming about the Kiphart program. I want to start off with a quick round of introductions of the admissions folks in the room, so you can know who's here and who's answering your questions in the chat. My name is Aleia McKessy. I am one of the assistant directors of admissions for the Crown Family School. And I am an alum of the program as well, and the early iteration of the Kiphart program when it was a little bit different, but had some of the same foundations from a couple of years ago. So I'm really excited to hear what's going on right now and to share that with all of you. Also in the room from admissions, Ron Martin, Director of Admissions, Jamal Banks, Assistant Director of Admissions, and Emma Toomey, our admissions specialist, and Brittney, who is one of our student ambassadors, who's also part of the Kiphart program. So they will all be in the chat answering any questions that we know of, or just letting you know that we'll get to those questions at the end. So if we need to save any for Jessica, we can do that as well. And then to take it over, Jessica Darrow is a professor here at the Crown Family School and is one of the directors of the Kiphart program. So she's going to share a little bit about the program and what it looks like, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for being here. I wanted to just begin, I'll introduce myself in a moment, but I want to begin with maybe some Zoom practices for this conversation. I have a slide deck, which I'll put up in a moment, but if you have questions as I move through the slide deck, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And that way the team can keep track of the questions and I can go about answering them as soon as the presentation is over. Sometimes what happens is very reasonable questions come up that are then answered in a slide or two. So I want to hold questions till the end and yet don't want you to lose your trains of thought. So please do put them in the chat as they come up. And if you're welcome to stay off screen, and if you come on screen, wonderful. Whatever you need to do is completely fine, of course, but do please go on mute if you don't mind, so we don't get feedback, because I've gotten a bunch of feedback today on earlier Zooms. And that's all I have to say on that. I'm Jessica Darrow. It is lovely to meet everyone here. I use she, her pronouns. I am an associate instructional professor here at the Crown Family School. And what that means is that I am an instructor first. I teach first, and I'm a social worker. I teach classes in the core of our curriculum, and so I'm very familiar with the trajectory of incoming and first-year students through that experience. And then I also teach classes in my specialty area, in my area of research, which is in refugee resettlement, and now more recently in climate change and human mobility. And I raise this point because I really want folks to understand that I come at the leadership of this Kiphart Scholars Program and the understanding of curriculum around global issues from my own both practice and also research experience. So let me share my slide deck and talk through the intricacies of our global programming. Does that sound look good to everyone? Oops, I went back to sleep. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk through what we understand at the Crown Family School as the two ways that any student in our program can really delve into global health and social development curriculum and experiential learning. Very recently, the Crown Family School has really come to understand that there's a growing need for global and comparative perspectives in our education. And when I say recently, this school is over 100 years old. We have a deep history of training social work clinicians and training folks to do policy work and social administrative work in the social work realm. But what we didn't necessarily have as much depth and experience in is training practitioners in social work to really think through a comparative and global lens and or to practice outside the US. And so in the last 15 or so years, we've really started to develop our curriculum and our programming with this goal in mind. There's a set of sort of guiding frameworks for our curriculum, our practice, and our instruction in front of you on the screen. What we really understand is that there are some distinctions between what we're trying to do in our global programming and what we've always done around US practice. Our students who are taking a global lens really need comparative perspective. They need to be trained, we believe, in understanding what it means to take a comparative perspective. How do you do it? How do you think about what you're comparing? How do you think about what carries over from one context to another, from one culture to another, and what does not carry over? What's distinct about culture and needs to remain in place? And really, most importantly, coming from the institution that we do at the University of Chicago, with its prominence on the global stage, but also being a predominantly white institution historically, how do we think about not exporting our understanding and conceptions of care and of social work, but really learning from and with partners around the world? And so this framework has been really important to the guiding of our program development. Also, we really want our clinical and programmatic students to really understand that those two things are not distinct. If you're engaging in direct practice with individuals, with family systems, or with communities, if you're engaging in a program evaluation or in research around practice methods, that really these are not distinct kinds of practice within social work, but rather social work is an integrated discipline in which people are called on to engage with individuals or with systems in ways that really, really relate to the other form of practice. If you're a practitioner, you need to know the systems that your clients are embedded in. And if you're a systems level thinker trying to engage in program evaluation, you need to know how that work impacts individuals. So we're taking an integrated approach to our education. And finally, there's a whole host of frameworks that the common curriculum at the core curriculum at the Crown Family School doesn't necessarily offer to all students. And we want folks interested in the global practice to really have exposure to human rights and the associated conventions, to thinking about community development as a practice, which is quite common outside the US, and to be thinking again through these comparative perspectives. And finally, anyone who's interested in mental health in the US might think of that as a didactic relationship between a clinician and a participant in clinical care. But outside the US, the construct of mental health is thought of a little bit differently as mental health and psychosocial supports. And those supports might be secondary, might not be engaging in a didactic relationship. So we want our students to be exposed to all of these different kinds of perspectives and frameworks. So the first way that students in our school can engage in this global health and social development understanding and learning is through a set of classes. This is what we're calling a pathway through our curriculum. All students at the Crown Family School will take the same core classes that give everybody really just a framework for understanding what is social work. How do you do social work? What does that even mean? What are some basic research methods that we can use? How do we consume information? How do we know what's good information? So everyone will engage in this instruction. But then for the students in the global health pathway, we ask them to take one foundations course that really exposes all of the students interested in global mental health or program evaluation in international settings. We want to expose every one of those students to the foundational concepts in global social welfare. How do we think about welfare service provision outside of the US? How do we think about the development space and its impact on local communities around the world? How do we think about, again, mental health and the way it's scripted in different contexts? So students can pick one of these two foundations courses and take that as a requirement for the global pathway. Beyond that, students are asked to take just two electives. And this is just a sampling of many, many electives that we have. We have an array of courses that are really comparative in nature or that take a deep dive into a context outside of the US. And this just gives you a sampling of the kinds of classes that we teach. So again, to recap, any student coming into our social work program, this is not something you have to apply for. It's just something you have to express an intent to focus on. Students who want to delve into this kind of curriculum are asked to commit to the pathway and then sign up to take one of these foundations courses and two global electives. And this is a way that any of you applying to our school can come and take advantage of this education. There's another opportunity, which is to apply now before you matriculate to the Crown Family School to the Kiphart Scholars Program in Global Health and Social Development. And this particular program has two tracks, which I'll talk through. It's a simple distinction between the two tracks, and I want to make it not overcomplicated, but still give you the nuances of the two different ways through this program. This program, unlike the curricular pathway I just described, comes with an experiential learning element. And the Kiphart program calls it a scholars program because we provide some supplemental funding to offset the costs of that learning opportunity outside the US. So this is a quick summary of the program. It provides opportunities for students to learn about social work outside the US and to think about, again, what can be imported into a practice here in the US if you return to the US, or if you're an international student, what you can bring to your country of origin should you hope to return there. How do we think about what translates again and what doesn't? We're really trying to equip students for employment opportunities with international populations in the US or in their home country, having learned again how you adapt the education you're getting in Chicago at a local moment in time in a local setting back to your home country. So we want you to think about, what are your long-term goals? If your goal is to really equip yourself in an employment pathway for this kind of work, then please consider this program. We're going to lean in heavily in our training, think about ethics of being a person in this work, how your identities relate to the kind of work that you want to do, the degree to which they may not relate, how you think about what the right roles are for each of us. And the way that we're going to do that is by leaning deeply into cross-cultural context. How do you develop a sense of intercultural awareness? How do you participate in moments of deep ambiguity about expectations for yourself or discomfort with what you're doing, and yet understand the boundaries and limitations of what you should do? Be able to sort of leap a bit into the unknown, but with a deep sense of self-awareness and of consultation. This program is really asking students to engage in a learning process that is a bit more ambiguous than one in which you are in Chicago in partnership with local communities, knowing exactly where the parachute will be should you feel you're falling. Sometimes with our global programming, that parachute can be a little harder to identify. And so we're looking for students who are able to ask for help when they need it and feel like they can move into spaces of discomfort and know that they will be held regardless of what happens by our programming and by our supports. We don't take a break in this program. So if you're here for the 2-year program, or if you're here for the part-time 3-year program, your summers will be busy in engagement with the Kiphart program. And I want to explain what that looks like. So I think I said a minute ago, I did, that there are 2 tracks you can move through this Kiphart Scholars Program with. On your left is the parallel track. And this is the track that Aleia spoke to and that she was a part of back when she was in this program. This is a track in which you are in Chicago for your 2 or 3 years of curriculum. In one of the summers that you're engaged as a student, so either between your 1st and 2nd years or somewhere between the 2nd year and 3rd year if you're a part-time student, you'll engage in a summer internship abroad. The other opportunity is to take a study abroad trip in that summer, and we lift one of those in India in the summer months. So this is your experiential learning outside of the US, and I can talk through what that internship process looks like if folks like during the Q&A. After the summer internship or the study abroad, when you've gotten some experiential learning outside the US, you come back to Chicago and you engage in your field placement in Chicago while you're taking classes. And that field placement is most often for students in our program with folks who have migrated to the city or engaging on issues relating to migration. And here are the training options, and your thoughts around future employment might include the kinds of work, the kinds of jobs that you might have engaging in casework or research around an issue that has to do with a comparison across contexts, mental health service provision with folks who have migrated to Chicago from another place, another country. So there's a whole host of jobs that this can equip people to do. And the real bulk of that international learning, again, is outside the US in the summer. On the right is a newer track that we've developed over the last 5 years. And in this track, which we call the immersive track, the students complete their 1st year at the Crown Family School. And then in the summer, between their first and second years, they take coursework, a full load of coursework. Extended students, that is part-time students, also will just take coursework all the way through both their summers. They're taking 2 courses all the way through. So in this case, the students are taking a straight load of classes until the January of their second year or January of their third year if they're part-time. And at that point, they're going abroad for their field placement. And this is a field placement that happens in a full-time block amount of time. So 6, it actually ends up being more like 5 months abroad. And you complete your curriculum really before you leave. There's one piece of curriculum that comes with you when you travel abroad for your field placement, which is an independent study that allows you to tether that field placement work to your conceptions of your growing professional identity. And that culminates in a capstone research paper while you're abroad. And here again, the same kinds of opportunities for training and for long-term employment roles. This is the basic breakdown, and I'll answer questions about this again at the end of the slide deck, but I have a little bit more nuanced description of some programming before I get there. The application, as I said, to the Kiphart Scholars Program is already open. So any applicant to our program can apply to the Kiphart Scholars Program with one caveat. If you're here for the advanced standing program, unfortunately, you don't have time to leave the country because that is a 1-year curriculum program with no gaps. So as you can understand from what I just described, there's no time to leave. So for advanced standing students, you'll really want to think about the pathway that I described, which is a curricular focus in comparative and global learning. But for folks who will be here for 2 or 3 years, the application is currently open on the Crown Family website. And here we're asking you to complete a short essay and contribute a case study video reflection. And there's a prompt in the application materials. And when we get to the Q&A, we can ask Brittney if you don't mind speaking to your experience with the application. Applications are accepted anytime from now until the applications process for the Crown Family School completes in the late spring of next year. Should you apply to the program now before matriculation, you will be accepted into the Kiphart Scholars Program, assuming there's alignment. And we have a team of 3 individuals who will read your application materials, watch your video, and then make a determination about the program. You will matriculate to the school in the fall. And then for those interested in the immersive track that I just explained, there's one last step in the application process. In January of 2025, you will engage in a short interview, and it really is a deep conversation. The interview is much more of a conversation where we try to figure out whether your learning goals are aligned with the opportunities that we have for you on the immersive track. So all students by January of 2025 will know which track they're in. And at that point, we start planning for your summer and ongoing experience at the school. I have just a little bit of information here about our selection criteria, so we're being transparent with you. What we want to know from your essay and in your video reflection is what you're interested in doing, a little bit about what your skills are and what values and interests are bringing you to the School of Social Work, and particularly to thinking about focusing in this way on global and comparative learning. We care to know, for example, if you have a deep value of humility in your work, if your value is community, being community-centered, if your value is to thinking about families, your family in particular, and other people's engagement with family. We just want to know what values you're bringing to the work and what skill sets you think are useful. So I give you 2 examples here, and yet anything is wonderful. We want to know who you are. Similarly, we want to know what your interests are, and we don't have a scripted set of interests we're looking for. We're really trying to understand who you are with this brief set of materials so that we can figure out whether the learning opportunities we have are aligned with who we get a sense of you are. That was a weird sentence. That said, we do have a cap, and this is a resource cap, both financially and in terms of learning opportunities abroad. We have room for 24 students in this program. You know what I'd love to do? Before I move into a further description of the program, I would love to take a pause because that was a lot of information. And I'll describe the program in more depth. But before I do, any questions from the group at this point about applying to our program, about the structure of the different kinds of ways you could move through the Crown Family School with global and comparative learning in mind?
There was one in the chat that I can go ask. I'm wondering if you graduate early when completing the immersive track, or if there is a typically additional coursework to complete in the spring of the final year.
That's a great question because when you go abroad in January of your final year, you'll go abroad for 6 months. So there's no more course completion, but you won't come back until graduation. And I want to be also transparent about why we do this. The requirements for field completion for graduation are far and away completed before you finish 6 months in the field in that immersive track. The reason for asking you to do 5 to 6 months has everything to do with your future employment. For people we have found over the years in this program, for people who are interested in working outside the US, knowing that you left your school for 3 months, even 3.5 months for a robust internship, doesn't always give employers outside the US a sense that you have a deep familiarity with practice outside the US. And when we asked and interviewed employers, say at UNICEF or UNHCR or partner organizations at the community level in Singapore, we interviewed people all over the world to ask, what are you looking for in terms of training to hire someone who went to school in Chicago at your international organization? And what we heard is 6 months, 5 months is the minimum. We need people to have had more experience than just a summer abroad. And so if you want that kind of experience, the immersive track could be interesting to you. However, if that feels like a time away that is just too much that you can take for whatever reason, you have commitments at home that require you to be in Chicago for longer, whatever it may be, then the parallel track is maybe better suited to you, in which case we're only asking you to be abroad for eight weeks for an internship, or the study abroad program, which is for 5 weeks. It's 4.5 to 5 weeks in India. And finally, if leaving the country at all because you're working and there may be other demands that don't allow you to leave the country in this way, that's why we're offering a curricular path through the program that really gives you exposure to all the ways of thinking and learning that we're asking of, other than the experiential learning outside the US. I hope that answers the question. Any others, Aleia, at this point? Sorry, you're on mute, and thank you for being my partner in this.
One more just came through. You may be answering this in the future slides, but for the immersive track field placement, how are students placed? So what is their involvement in choosing the placement?
Wonderful. I will speak to that in a moment. So with that, should I move ahead, or are there any questions about the application process?
That looks like it is it for now.
Okay. There we are. Okay, so for students who are going to engage in the Kiphart Scholars Program, in the fall of your first year, you'll see that you've applied, and we're going to engage you in this, or engage ourselves as the administration in tracking you into one of the two tracks. So please don't think of this as the way, I know from my child who's in public school in Chicago, tracking comes with connotations about like, I'm ready for a higher level of math or a lower. This is not what we mean by the word. We're really just trying to figure out which of these pathways is the right fit for you, given the kinds of things I just talked about. You may apply through an interview to the immersive track, and you would know that by the beginning of winter quarter. Then in the winter and spring of the first year at the Crown Family School, you'll engage in a really deep focus on us building a community with you. We want you to see each other as a community of practice. And we have so many ways of developing that feeling of cohesion amongst the group. So we do a community building workshop in winter. We do an ethics workshop in spring, but meanwhile, there's a whole host of other activities, and maybe Brittney, this is something that you might speak to when we get to the Q&A, what the opportunities have been for community building. As I described in the summer of the first year, parallel track students are either taking an internship abroad or engaging in a study abroad, and immersive track students are engaging in coursework. But meanwhile, for all students in the Kiphart Scholars Program, we start a seminar. And this is one of those community building activities. It will travel from the summer of your first year all the way to the moment of graduation. We have monthly seminars in which we meet on the video, on Zoom. My goodness, after all these years in Zoom, you'd think I could remember. I almost said on Skype. We'll meet on Zoom once a month as a community of practice to engage in consultation with each other and very deep and engaged support around the learning that you each are doing. Now, this is as if you were in a 2-year trajectory, and it is absolutely important that I describe to you what a part-time and 3-year trajectory will look like as well. So I'll do that in a moment. If you are engaged in the parallel track, then for the second year, you'll engage in coursework, in a field placement in Chicago. You'll stay in that seminar. And then the last requirement is in the spring of your graduating year, you will provide a small community presentation. It's a 10-minute presentation, but it really allows you to sort of think holistically about your journey at the Crown Family School and what taking a comparative lens has given you in terms of a view to your future. That said, you can also opt in the parallel track to taking an independent study in the spring of your final year and writing a capstone research paper. It's not required of you, but you can have that opportunity if that's appealing to you by that time in your trajectory. For part-time students on the parallel track, the schedule looks exactly the same, but you span it over a 2-year time period. So you're taking coursework all the way through, you're engaging in your field placement over a 2-year period, but only once a week, and you're engaging in the seminar in the same way. For immersive track students, they stay, as I said, in the summer between the 2 years or between the 3 years, they're taking coursework. In the fall of the final year, they're taking coursework. And what we call the winter, which is January of your graduating year, all the way through to the spring, you go abroad and complete your field placement abroad rather than in Chicago. So this is not an internship. This is a field placement, the completion of which is a requirement for graduation. Instead of doing it in Chicago, you're doing it at a field site with which our field office has a contractual agreement to provide you with learning opportunities and supervision, which aligns with the Council on Social Work Education expectations and requirements for our accreditation and for your graduation. And that is what the distinction is between the two programs. For those on the parallel track, I've said a lot of this already, but I do want to underscore at the bottom of this slide that we offer between $1,000 and $5,000 in a stipend. It is not money that you have to apply for. Once you're accepted into the parallel track, this money is yours. And the reason we call it $1,000 to $5,000, so far it's never been 1, it's always closer to 5, is that the money is prorated based on your location. So for instance, if you're going to India on our study abroad program, that program is fully funded by the Crown Family School other than flights. And so what we do with a stipend is to offer students a stipend to offset the price of their flights if they're in our Kiphart Scholars Program. But for students who are doing an internship, say, as someone did last summer in Mexico City, we give them the full $5,000 to get to Mexico City, pay for the apartment, and so that your internship host in Mexico City doesn't need to provide any sort of financial support for you. The goal here is to really supplement so that you don't have any cost for this experiential learning opportunity, but also so that our program partners around the world don't have to bear the cost of bringing in an intern who has the skills that you'll bring to their office. And then for the immersive track students, I'll point you towards this last point here on the slide. We provide up to $10,000 for the same purposes. And again, you can think about this as the $5,000 is for up to 3 months in a summer period, and the $10,000 is up to 6 months in the intensive block placement. So this is the major distinction in cost between the two programs that we're trying to offset on behalf of our students. So a word about what the field placements are and how we match students to them. On the left here, you'll see a whole host of organizations that we partner with, our field office partners with in Chicago, and an array of the kinds of organizations that you can work in. And I want to say a little bit about what you might do. If you're on the parallel track and you're really interested in learning about clinical mental health service provision for refugees, immigrants, survivors of torture. Then if you stay in Chicago, we can place you, you apply to field placements for the second year. And then you will find there's a whole host of placements that have really scaffolded and excellent mental health training for this kind of work, where you would be trained to do one-on-one mental health service provision with, again, survivors of torture or who are refugees or immigrants to the US. We have the Heart Alliance Freedom from Trafficking program, where you'll be providing case management for folks who are escaping trafficking. We have an advocacy and policy position at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, doing really excellent advocacy work at both the city level and at the state level. So there's a whole host of different training experiences that you can have in Chicago. The reason I leaned in a little more heavily there on the kind of clinical training that you can get is that in Chicago, we can provide you with the training that equips you to then go on for your licensure and then to move forward to earn the hours and get your licensed clinical social work accreditation. That said, on the immersive track, while we do have some training that has you engaging individually with people or with families, with youth, with communities, we don't have placements at which people will be providing one-on-one therapeutic care outside of your culture of origin. And this is a very carefully thought through ethical stance that we have developed, where we still have students engaged in learning what mental health and psychosocial support looks like outside the US. We have a student this January, who's going to Rio, to Brazil. This person speaks Portuguese fluently. They're from Brazil originally, and they're going to be providing clinical adjacent, we call them, services to community members in the favela in Rio while they'll be working. They're still not going to be providing one-on-one mental health support, even though this person is Brazilian and speaks Portuguese, because they haven't learned the kinds of tools that are used in practice in this setting in Brazil. They've been learning clinical practice in Chicago. So what they're going to learn is, how does clinical practice look in Rio? And they're going to be engaging in consultation with clinical providers, and they're going to be engaging in group work. There's a whole host of really excellent services that they'll be learning to provide, but it doesn't necessarily set them up for a long-term career in one-on-one didactic mental health care. So I go into detail here just to give you an understanding of the kinds of things you can learn on either of our tracks. And you see on the right an array of the places around the world where we already have institutional relationships and partnerships with providers, where we can place students for internships, for field placements. What this looks like is that starting from the very beginning of your time at the Crown Family School, we are trying to get to know you and your interests, what sorts of things you might like to do both in your time at the school, but also in your career. And as I've said, in the beginning of your first quarter, you're taking core classes, you're getting acclimated to being in the school, maybe to being in Chicago for the first time. And we're trying to help you decide whether you're interested in the parallel or immersive track. Starting in January of your first year, Christina Gross, who's my colleague in this program, and I will be spending a lot of time in conversation and dialogue with each of you to try to understand what you might want to learn and where. And at that point, we start thinking with you already about your second year field placement. Our students apply to their second year field placements. We can't just put someone in a placement anywhere, either in Chicago or around the world. So let's just say, for instance, you're a student who's currently in our program. You might apply in March to a field placement in Mexico City. And yet, the chances that a field placement in Mexico City knows that they're ready to host you in January of the following year, in March, are very unlikely. So one of the things that we've found over our years with this program is that students in the immersive track really do need to hold a deep level of ambiguity. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. We have students who are going abroad in January who just solidified their field placements in November. there was not really a chance that they weren't going to have a field placement. It is our obligation to make sure that people have training opportunities. They had lots of irons in the fire, so to speak. But there were organizations that just didn't know they were going to have the capacity for our students until November. And so part of what you need to know about yourself and also know about this program is your degree of tolerance for ambiguity and that the program brings a lot of it. The parallel track, on the other hand, brings a much greater degree of predictability is the right word. We have come more and more to understand that our parallel track program really is more suited to people who like to plan ahead and who are comforted in knowing what their journey is going to look like. Our immersive track program is so deeply tailored to each individual's experience that I can't really tell you what it's going to look like for you because I don't know you yet. And it's not going to look the way for you that it looked for anybody else. And that may sound great, but it's not great if you're a person who just wants to know what's it going to be? What will it look like? What can I plan for? So I am really trying to be, and we've agreed as a team to be as transparent as possible about this so that you know what you're getting and you don't get to the Crown Family School thinking one thing and then being really disappointed or unsettled by what you find if you're interested in this immersive track. It is such a good opportunity for the person who wants it and who works this way, and really deeply destabilizing opportunity. I say that with a giggle, but only because I don't want this to happen to anyone. For someone who's like, just, can I know already? Where am I going? Where am I buying my tickets for? I think I've said enough on this point. I really don't have another slide. I just realized my last slide is just how to get in touch with us. So I would love to take questions and then invite Brittney in to just speak a little bit about their own experience. I know Brittney has not been in the program all that long, but I think for folks who are applying, it might be helpful to hear from someone who's not that far away from the application process themselves. So let's maybe start with questions, and then Brittney, would you be okay jumping in a couple minutes? Cool, okay. All right, who is our MC of questions?
I will do the ones that are here. So with about the application, is there any advantage for people who've already applied and like submitted their application for the program? Is there any advantage to applying to the Kiphart program before receiving an admissions decision?
That's just a great question. The answer is advantage, no. We can't admit you to the Kiphart Scholars Program until you're admitted to the Crown Family School, but we're certainly happy to make those considerations in tandem. It's a different group of people making the different decisions. So your admissions to the Crown Family School is happening through our admissions committee. Your admissions to the Kiphart program is happening through the Kiphart program. And so it's not the same group of people. And we won't accept you to the Kiphart program if you're not going to be accepted to the Crown Family School. That's not fair. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's really up to you. It's up to your bandwidth. It's up to what works for you. And there's also no disadvantage for holding off your application a little bit. That said, there is a cap at 24. So it does make some sense to think about not waiting too long to apply. We've never had so many applications ahead of matriculation that we filled up, not yet. So I hope that there will not be a concern that if we would have accepted you, if only we'd had your application a month before. As you can see, there are 24 people on the screen and a whole host of us work at the school. So it's very likely that we're not going to have more than 24 applications that we're accepting ahead of matriculation. And to be clear, we reopen applications if the program is not full before people arrive. We reopen the application period after matriculation, and we keep it open until this point, actually, until mid-December. So if you want to guarantee yourself a seat, you want to apply before you matriculate. The class could fill up. But if you don't apply now, you can always apply to this program, assuming it's not full, once you've matriculated to the school. I hope that helped and didn't make it more confusing.
No, I think that was really helpful. How many parallel track Kiphart program students have gone the LCSW route and ended up doing one-on-one clinical work? Is this common or not recommended?
Oh, what a great question. For the parallel track this was.
Yes.
Wow. I don't have that number handy, but that doesn't mean I don't have it. I keep track of all the students who have graduated. I have deep relationships with so many of our alum who are around the city and around the world. And I can tell you it's not uncommon. Some of our current supervisors in Chicago at field placements are students who graduated from this program, are now providing not just one-on-one counseling to folks in their programs, but also supervision for our current Kiphart Global Scholar students. And that's also true around the world. The supervisor for our field placement in Tanzania is someone who's a Tanzanian national, came to the Crown Family School, and now is back in practice in Tanzania and is both a provider and also a supervisor in our program. And that's true at a lot of our partnerships. But in terms of providing mental health care in their employment after graduation, yes, it's a very common path.
Great. The next question is, can you talk a little more about the capstone projects?
Yeah, the capstone projects are many things because each person does their own. So talk about an individualized process. This is an independent study. And the question is, after you've gotten on the ground, wherever you're going, I really ask people to wait about a month or two before they even start thinking about it. And the question is, what interests you? What do you want to learn more about? What part of the job is a surprise to you? And would you like to make comparisons to experiences you had before? People come up with all sorts of exciting projects. And then we support each other. It's a workshop style independent study. And I, as the instructor, but students have sometimes worked with other instructors. I am sort of the default instructor, but I guide students in a workshop capacity through the different aspects of the research project. So together we'll work and then workshop on your guiding question for the paper. Then we'll work on what methods are you going to use? Are you going to interview people? Are you going to do archival research where you look at contracts, memorandums of understanding, laws in the country where you are? And then how are you going to proceed with writing the paper? So it all happens in community with each other. And every single one of them has looked different. The paper is a robust 30-page plus paper. Some people have written 50-page papers because they got very excited. And sometimes these projects happen in partnership with the organization where you're embedded. So if the organization is asking you to do some research, we do ask you to turn in something that is your own work and not some, a joint project that happened in partnership with other people. But it can be something that you're doing for the benefit of the organization. So they may say, we would love to have your intern or to have this intern work specifically on a research project about, one person, for instance, did a comparison between the placement they were in Singapore and the legal protections in Singapore for domestic workers who lived in the home, and a deep comparison between what was happening in that country and in South Korea, which was the country of origin for this particular student. And that was something that lived then at the organization, but the student turned in for their capstone. Just an example.
Great. So then the next question is, do all students in the parallel track do their summer placement in India? Can you share a bit more about the host organization in India?
So the study abroad in India is a study abroad program that any student at the Crown Family School can apply for. You don't have to be in the Kiphart Scholars Program to apply for that study abroad program. But if you are in the Kiphart Scholars Program and you apply for the 4 to 5 week study abroad, then you go to India with a group of students and you engage in coursework. You actually take this for a class. You get a class credit for it. You engage in coursework at the Tata Institute for Social Sciences, and you shadow master's students who are at the Tata School for Social Sciences in their field placements. Then later in the academic year, we host students from that master's program at the Crown Family School. So it's a really cool exchange of students. However, if you'd like to engage in an internship abroad as opposed to the study abroad, you can do that in a number of ways. Many of our students use me and Christina for support in finding an internship of their own interest somewhere around the world, a place they've always wanted to go and where they have language capacity, or a place where they've been before, for instance. Or a student might take from us the list of internships that students have completed as part of the parallel track and contact that organization with our support and then complete an internship after dialogue and application with that organization. So one example is a partnership we have with an organization in El Salvador. just so happens that the ED of that organization also went to the Crown Family School. And year after year, someone's gone there for an 8 to 9 week summer internship, and they have really developed a tailored internship to the interests and skills of that student. And I could have described that in any of the places around the world where we've sent students. The internships are extremely tailored. They're not field placements, so there is not this understanding that it's a curricular requirement. There's no requirement of supervision by a licensed social worker or someone with an advanced degree, which is true of our field placements. And they're just much more formed by the interest of the student in partnership with the organization, as opposed to the institutional connection that a field placement requires.
Great. So the next question, generally, this is a hard one. Generally, where do you see students who graduate from the Kiphart program go on to work?
No, it's a great one. You're one of them. And the answer is so many cool and exciting places. We have a student who graduated from our cohort in when was the pandemic? 2020. The student graduated like just at the beginning of the pandemic, in June of that first year of the pandemic. And that person went on to work at IRAP, the International Refugee Assistance Project, as the only social worker in that legal organization in New York. We have folks who have graduated in the program who are doing, as I said, like mental health services in Chicago with immigrants and refugees. We have someone who just graduated from the program, is actually currently looking for a full-time job and has 2 part-time jobs in Chicago. They do like violence interruption work in terms of intimate partner violence, and they work with people who have been designated as what they call perpetrators by the program, of intimate partner violence, and they're working across programs right now. We have students who are working in Washington, D.C. on the Hill who are graduates of this program. So just a whole array of different jobs. I will say, if there's anyone here who's an international student, there is pretty good support at the University of Chicago, pretty robust support from OIA in terms of helping students really think about that first year after graduation. And we have a number of international students who are in the US in places of work or in graduate programs. Some of our students go on to do Fulbrights or Boren fellowships. A lot of our students go on to PhDs. So I'll stop going on. You can see there's a whole array of outcomes, but there's not a single person who is in our program. Could I say this? I think there's not a single person I know who stayed in a relationship with us, and I think we're in a relationship with almost everybody, who's not doing something they're excited about doing. I think because there's so much support in this program and there's such a tether after graduation, and because it's such a big community of practice, we see that people stay really engaged and support each other in finding and securing and then shifting between jobs. Oh no, did I lose Brittney? I was just going to say, let's turn to Brittney for a moment. And I think Brittney's not here. So we won't turn to Brittney for a moment. If you're here, Brittney, I don't see them, right?
No, I don't.
Any other questions, Aleia?
Yes, there's a question. Well, there was one on if people can do the study abroad, if not doing the program, which you answered. And then the next question is there data on the diversity within the current scholars? Diversity regarding pre-employment, industries, race, ethnicity, social work only, all that stuff.
Sorry, social work only. I don't know what I would say about
Versus
that.
like a dual program.
Okay. In the immersive track, dual degree students, I will say we used to have dual degree students in the immersive track, and that's proven to be really challenging. And so we're trying to encourage dual degree students to really think about the parallel track. It's just too many requirements to check off to make it all work and be gone for 2 whole quarters, we found. So there's a real challenge with the dual degree in the immersive track. The parallel track is fine. I will say, of all of our tracks, I'll come back to you in one moment, James, thank you. In all of our cohorts at the Crown Family School, yes, we have some, statistic isn't the right word. I have demographic information of everyone who's ever been through our program. Our program is really, really diverse. I think what happens is people who are interested in a global program often come from a background of being an international student, for instance. So we always have quite a number of international students. We have a higher number of students of color in our program than we do in other sort of cohort experiences in this school. We also have like linguistic diversity. We have socioeconomic diversity. We have a lot of first-gen students in our program. So we have a variety of kinds of diversity in the program. And I think that that's because, in part, as I said, of what we're doing and the degree to which we're taking a cultural humility stance, like at the forefront of our work, and trying to think about social work not as sort of exceptional in the US, but rather that we have so much to learn from outside the US. And so the folks who are drawn to our program are people who often bring that mindset, and that's either from their own lived experience or exposure, or something else. I don't know. I can't speak to all the reasons why, but we have a really, really cool, different sort of array of diverse folks in our program. James, you had a question? I can't tell if you're typing or trying to come off mute, but I do see your hand raised, so I want to leave space for you to come on in. And I see Brittney coming back too. There you are. Hi, James.
So I'm gonna ask, like, for students who don't get accepted into the program, like, are there like study abroad international opportunities?
Yes, thank you for that question. So there's one study abroad opportunity that counts as the sort of requirement to go abroad for the Kiphart program, and that's this India program, and anyone at the school can apply for it. But there are also two other study abroad programs at the Crown Family School. They just don't have enough of a depth or length of time to count for the requirement for the Crown Family School study abroad. So currently, right now, in the beginning of December, we have, I think, 8 students who are in Vietnam right now as a part of a study abroad program. We also have a study abroad program that we've lifted every year other than the COVID years, for the last 8 or 10, I think, to Hong Kong and mainland China. So we have an array of study abroad programs at the Crown Family School. I'm going to be spending next summer trying to develop a new one in Bangladesh. So they're always growing, and these are open to anyone at the Crown Family School, even if you choose not to apply to the Kiphart program.
Okay, one more question, please.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask when the deadline for the Kiphart program application is.
Thank you for that question. Ron and Aleia, when is the deadline for admissions currently?
The final deadline is April 1st.
Our Kiphart Scholars Program deadline is April 1st. And at that point, we'll close the application process. And then if the class does not fill up with 24 students at that point, then we'll reopen the Kiphart application process in the first week of the fall quarter and keep it open until December of the first year. So I wonder if I can take a moment. I know there may be a few more questions, but before I turn to them, because we have you back, Brittney, I wonder if you want to share anything about the beginning of your experience or the application process in particular, given that so many people are thinking about that part right now. I think there was a question earlier about the video. So if there's any part of your application experience that you want to speak to, Brittney, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. Good to see you. For my application process specifically, I think it was really important for me to prioritize how I see myself in the field, like what kind of social worker I want to be, and why I'm applying for this program specifically. I highlighted that a lot. I worked that into my scenario for the video response. I spoke a lot about like my human-centered approach to care, and how my identities and lived experiences inform my practice. As a Black, queer, dark-skinned, agender, disabled person, my lived experience qualifies me. It provides a unique outlook and perspective, especially globally, considering that I don't fit into a lot of the boxes like in this world. It's specifically in America. I thought it was a really nice opportunity for me to kind of showcase that and show what I could bring to the program and the kind of social worker I want to be, not just in Chicago, but like in the world. And I prioritized that, and I spoke to that a lot, which I think is why I got accepted into the program. I hope that's why, because that's why I did it. Yeah. It's really just that. Just don't put too much pressure on it. I think just considering like your social worker self, how you see yourself in the field, what gravitated you towards the work, and what about this program specifically speaks to the kind of social worker you want to be. That's what I did. And after that, the rest was pretty seamless. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Brittney. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's, that's a big piece of what I think stood out in Brittney's application. And the other piece was just like a huge sense of love. Like, I think this work is hard. I spoke a lot about the ambiguity. This work is hard. The work is hard no matter where you go. Just to be clear, the work is not harder because you leave the US in terms of what you're seeing or what you're contending with. But what I think is harder than staying in the US, staying in Chicago, is this piece of the unknown. The one thing that's different is that this is, as I keep saying, unpredictable. And folks who are in field placements are not in field placements in a cohort of other students they've been moving through the program with. And so, one of the things that I think Brittney reflects is like a sense of self, right? And like, this is who I am, and I know what I need. And yet I'm a flexible human being, right? Who's already like sort of demonstrated that I know how to adapt and I know how to advocate for what I need. And I think you raised this, Brittney. I think one of the things that COVID really did for many people is kind of align people with those of us who do identify with having disabilities. A disability justice framework has really been helpful, I think, for lots of folks. Thank you for joining us in the world, to really understand that something that works for those of us with disabilities will also work for everybody. And so to really think about knowing how to advocate for what you need, and there's no shame in advocating for what you need, it makes you a better social worker. It means that you can advocate for your clients as well. And we are really interested in supporting people in figuring out what they need, advocating for it, but then being honest with them if we can't provide it. It is an institutional failure for us to ask you to advocate for what you need and then give you the impression we can provide it and not doing so. And that's why I keep leaning in over and over again to say to you, you don't have to figure out yourself if this is the right program for you. We will help you figure it out. And not because we're trying to screen you out. If you got accepted to the Crown Family School, we already know you are smart and wonderful. We want you here. This is your place. The question will be, if this is your place, what in it can we make work, and how? So I think Brittney really, you speak to that a little bit in terms of sort of naming who you are. And I encourage all of you to just think about who you are, what you want, and just be honest with us so that we can do our job of helping figure out what the trajectory can look like and what all the opportunities are. Wow, this school is so full of opportunities. So we want to really help you think about how to navigate those. Thanks, Brittney. Any last questions? Because it is 2 o'clock, or I'm on the East Coast right now, so it's 2 o'clock. So I know we're coming to the 1 o'clock hour in the Midwest, wherever folks are. Any last questions before we hang up? One thing I would, sorry about that.
There are none in the chat currently.
Okay, I'm going to just throw this out there. These are 2 email addresses. Mine is on the bottom. The top is for Christina Gross, who is my colleague in this program. And really neither of us does anything without the other in terms of making decisions. We keep each other looped in. So feel free to email both of us or either of us. You will get an answer. We are both very attuned to emails and really happy to have one-on-one conversations with anybody interested in hearing more about the program or just about the Crown Family School. We're really excited to support you in your application journey and help you figure out what's possible for you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.